The Galactic Council chamber was a marvel of alien engineering, vast, gleaming, and filled with representatives from hundreds of species. Yet, on this day, it radiated cold indifference. Jackson Carter, the young human at the center of attention, stood tall despite the heavy chains binding his wrists. His brown eyes scanned the faces of those who held his fate, unflinching in the face of accusations he knew were false. The Crothan ambassador, a reptilian creature with glinting scales, hissed as it recounted Jackson's alleged crimes. Espionage. Sabotage. Treason. Words that echoed off the chamber walls and silenced the murmurs of onlookers. The charges were absurd, flimsy even, but the council had no need for proof. Their decision had already been made. They required a scapegoat, a symbol to demonstrate their authority over humanity, the youngest and least influential species among them. The presiding counselor, an ancient, towering figure with shimmering translucent skin, announced the verdict: guilty. The punishment? Execution. A cruel finality hung in the air. Jackson clenched his fists but said nothing. His father's lessons echoed in his mind: never show fear to those who seek to control you. The guards escorted him to the execution platform, a sterile dais surrounded by energy emitters. Jackson's last moments were broadcast across the galaxy, as was the Council's intent. The disintegration beam hummed to life, its glow intensifying. Jackson closed his eyes, his lips moving silently. Not a plea for mercy, but a whisper of his father's name. Dad? In a distant star system, Ambassador Orion Carter was finalizing delicate peace negotiations between two warring factions. His communication device chimed, a message from the Galactic Council. Unbothered, Orion motioned for his aides to continue, only to freeze as the message played. The image of his son, bound and defiant, filled the holographic screen. His heart sank. He watched as the beam descended, engulfing Jackson in white-hot light. The screen flickered, then went dark. The room seemed to tilt. Orion barely registered the concerned voices of his aides. His mind replayed the image of his son's final moments. His grip tightened around the edges of the table, knuckles white. A lifetime of training kept his composure intact, but the storm brewing within him was unstoppable. He contacted the council immediately, demanding an explanation. Their response was infuriatingly clinical. Ambassador Carter, the evidence against Jackson was overwhelming. His actions jeopardized intergalactic stability. This was for the greater good. For the greater good? Orion repeated, his voice dangerously low. You murdered my son. The council's reply came with the kind of detachment only those drunk on power could muster. We trust you understand the importance of maintaining peace. Your personal loss is regrettable but necessary. Hours later, Orion sat alone in his quarters, replaying the events of the day. The council had not only executed his son but shattered his faith in the institution he had served for decades. Their arrogance blinded them, their hubris leading them to believe he would accept this atrocity without question. They couldn't have been more wrong. An encrypted message reached his private console, a file from an anonymous source. As Orion opened it, his anger hardened into something colder and more lethal. The file revealed the truth: Jackson had been framed. The Crotans had fabricated the charges to provoke distrust in humans and weaken their position within the Council. The Council, eager to assert dominance, had taken the bait. Orion didn't cry. His grief was buried beneath a growing resolve. Years of diplomacy had taught him patience and restraint, but this was different. This wasn't a negotiation, it was war. He would dismantle the Council piece by piece, expose their corruption, and ensure no other father experienced what he had. The galaxy had taken his son. Now, it would reckon with his wrath. Orion Carter stood at the edge of the observation deck in his private ship, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. Each pinpoint of light felt like a cruel reminder of the galaxy's vast indifference. He had spent years navigating this political labyrinth, mastering the art of compromise and diplomacy. Yet, in his son's final moments, all that experience had amounted to nothing. The Council had underestimated him, dismissing him as a grieving father clinging to a powerless species. That miscalculation would be their undoing. He resigned from his position as Earth's ambassador in a succinct transmission. The message was cold, professional, devoid of the outrage simmering beneath his words. They didn't deserve to see his fury yet. Officially, he was stepping away to process his loss. In reality, he was preparing to do what humanity did best: adapt and fight back. Orion's first step was intelligence. His grief could not cloud his strategy. He activated old connections, reaching out to informants and allies he had cultivated over the years. Many were reluctant to get involved. Crossing the council was a death sentence, and most couldn't fathom the risks. But a few, motivated by loyalty, fear, or their own grievances, agreed to help. The picture they painted confirmed what the encrypted file had suggested. The Crotons had orchestrated everything. They had planted false evidence, manipulated the council, and ensured the swift execution of the one person who could prove their innocence. As the details unfolded, Orion's anger sharpened into purpose. The Crotons had miscalculated. They had played their hand too boldly, leaving traces of their involvement scattered across intergalactic communication channels. Orion saw these as threads, each one leading closer to unraveling the conspiracy. What the Council and his enemies failed to understand was that Orion Carter was not just a diplomat. Decades ago, before he had mastered the art of negotiation, he had served as a covert operative in Earth's shadowy military division. His training wasn't just in words but in tactics, espionage, and survival. He had walked battlefields, dismantled insurgencies, and broken unbreakable enemies. The diplomat's suit and calm demeanor had always been a mask for the weapon beneath. Old habits resurfaced with ease. Orion began by assembling tools and resources he hadn't touched in years. A forgotten network of encrypted frequencies, access to classified human intelligence archives, and a small arsenal of gear collected during his military years. All of it was brought back into play. He operated in the shadows, keeping his movements silent and untraceable. The galaxy had taught him patience, and he would use it against them. During this time, the flashbacks came unbidden. He remembered Jackson as a boy, eager to learn, always questioning the galaxy's complexities. Jackson had been fascinated by strategy, often beating his father at intricate board games that required thinking 3 moves ahead. "You taught me to see the whole picture," Jackson had said once, grinning after a victory. The memory fueled Orion, grounding his resolve in love rather than rage. This fight wasn't just revenge, it was justice. As Orion traced the Crotons' actions, he realized he couldn't do this alone. He needed allies, but not just anyone. His years of diplomacy had revealed hidden talents among those the galaxy had cast aside. He contacted a rogue AI, a machine intelligence that had been exiled from its creators for refusing to follow orders. The AI was bitter, powerful, and deeply resentful of the Council. Orion's pitch was simple: help him, and they could expose the Council's hypocrisy while securing the AI's freedom. Next, he reached out to an alien warrior named Kale, once a decorated soldier for the Zarathian Empire. Kale had been disgraced and exiled after a failed rebellion against the Council. Orion found him in a forgotten corner of a mining colony, drowning his regrets in silence. Convincing Kale wasn't easy. The warrior had lost everything, including his will to fight. But Orion's words struck a chord. This wasn't about reclaiming glory. It was about dismantling the very system that had crushed them both. The third recruit was less conventional. Lyra, a telepathic empath from the Solver species, had no interest in violence or politics. Her abilities made her sensitive to the suffering of others, and she had spent years avoiding the galaxy's chaos. Orion appealed to her sense of justice, framing this as a mission to prevent future atrocities. Reluctantly, she agreed, though she warned him that reading the Council's minds would come at a cost. Together, this unconventional team began dismantling the Crotons' network. Orion's plan wasn't merely to expose them but to ensure the Council could never wield such unchecked power again. Their first operations were small but precise: data thefts, intercepted communications, and sabotaged supply lines. The Crotons began to notice, their paranoia growing with each strike. Yet, they couldn't pinpoint their enemy, as Orion left no trail. The Council remained oblivious to the storm brewing beneath their feet. They had made a fatal error in assuming humans were predictable. Orion Carter wasn't predictable. He was methodical, relentless, and above all, motivated by something far stronger than fear. The Crotons' paranoia grew as their operations began to unravel. Vital supply routes were disrupted, encrypted communications were intercepted, and sensitive data vanished from secure servers. Whispers of rebellion spread across the galaxy, quiet but undeniable. The Galactic Council remained largely unaware of the brewing storm, dismissing the disruptions as isolated incidents. But to the Crotons, it was clear someone was targeting them with precision, and their once flawless network of deceit was collapsing. Orion and his team had become a ghost in the machinery of the galaxy. Each strike was calculated, each move executed with surgical precision. The rogue AI, known only as Zero, worked tirelessly, slicing through the Council's defenses and exposing layers of corruption hidden within their bureaucracy. Zero's access to restricted systems gave them insights that Orion used to his advantage, not just to weaken the Crotons but to undermine the Council's credibility. The team's next target was a Council-controlled communications hub orbiting a resource-rich moon. It served as the nerve center for distributing propaganda and controlling the narrative around Jackson's execution. Orion's plan wasn't just to disrupt it but to hijack it entirely. By doing so, they could broadcast the truth about the Croton conspiracy to every corner of the galaxy. It was an audacious move, but Orion knew that to dismantle the Council's grip, he needed to shift the perception of the people they controlled. Kale, the disgraced warrior, took point on the ground operation. His knowledge of military tactics and unyielding resolve made him the perfect candidate to lead the infiltration. Lyra, the telepathic empath, played a quieter but equally vital role, using her abilities to anticipate the movements of the facility's security teams. Together they moved with efficiency, bypassing layers of automated defenses and alien guards who never saw them coming. As the team gained access to the hub's central systems, Orion worked with Zero to prepare the broadcast. The message had to be irrefutable, undeniable proof of the Crotons' treachery and the Council's complicity. It included decrypted transmissions, falsified evidence, and even visual records of the Croton operatives planting false data against Jackson. Orion's voice, calm but edged with steel, narrated the broadcast. He didn't make it about revenge or personal loss. It was about justice, about holding the galaxy's leaders accountable for their actions. When the broadcast went live, the galaxy watched in stunned silence. The evidence was damning. For many, it confirmed long-held suspicions about the Council's corruption and the lengths they would go to maintain control. The Crotons immediately tried to discredit the message, calling it a fabrication. But the details were too specific, too incriminating to dismiss. The ripple effects were immediate. Minor species who had long suffered under the Council's heavy hand began to revolt. Protests erupted on planets across the galaxy, demanding answers, demanding change. The Council scrambled to respond, issuing hollow reassurances that only further inflamed the growing unrest. Despite the success of the broadcast, Orion knew their fight was far from over. The Crotons, now fully aware of who was behind the attacks, doubled down on their efforts to eliminate him and his crew. The team became a target for bounty hunters, mercenaries, and assassins hired by both the Crotons and the Council. Every step forward came with greater risk, every victory shadowed by the knowledge that their enemies were closing in. Orion's next move was to strike at the Crotons directly. Their homeworld, a fortress protected by layers of orbital defenses and an elite fleet, was seemingly impenetrable. But Orion didn't intend to launch a frontal assault. Instead, he targeted their leadership, specifically the Council of Croton warlords who had orchestrated the framing of his son. Using the chaos created by the broadcast, the team infiltrated a high-level summit held on a neutral station deep within Council space. The summit, intended to be a secret meeting, was exposed by Zero, who had intercepted the Crotons' encrypted communications. Orion and his team posed as traitors, blending seamlessly into the bustling station. They used the cover to plant surveillance devices, gathering more evidence and mapping out the Croton hierarchy. Kale, now fully committed to the mission, insisted on leading the strike against the warlords. His loyalty to Orion had deepened, driven by the realization that this fight was more than a personal vendetta. It was a chance to dismantle the power structures that had oppressed so many for so long. The operation was swift and brutal. Kale's expertise in hand-to-hand combat and Orion's tactical planning ensured that the Crothan leadership was decimated in a single night. The surviving warlords fled, their power shattered. With the Crothans in disarray, Orion turned his focus back to the Council. The rebellion sparked by the broadcast was growing, but the Council still had its fleets, its influence, and its fear-mongering propaganda. To truly dismantle their hold, Orion needed to strike at the heart of their operation, the Dyson sphere that served as the Council's capital. It was an impossible target, protected by countless layers of defenses and patrolled by the most advanced ships in the galaxy. But Orion wasn't interested in the impossible, he was interested in what came next. The galaxy was beginning to see the truth. Now, they needed to see the Council fall. The Dyson sphere loomed ahead, an engineering marvel that symbolized the Galactic Council's dominance over the galaxy. Its vast surface shimmered with energy fields and weaponized satellites, a fortress that no fleet had ever dared to challenge. Orion's gaze remained fixed on the massive construct as his ship drifted closer under the guise of a diplomatic transport. It was a fitting irony, using the very tools of diplomacy the Council had taught him to deliver their downfall. The team moved with precision. Zero had already infiltrated the Dyson sphere's network, feeding the system false credentials that granted their ship clearance. Once inside the sphere's perimeter, the true plan began. The team wasn't here to destroy the sphere outright. Such an act would only create chaos without resolving the core issue. This was about dismantling the Council's stranglehold on power, and ensuring its corruption was laid bare for the entire galaxy to see. Orion directed Kale and Lyra to their objectives while he prepared for the final confrontation. Kale's task was to disable the sphere's internal defenses, a monumental challenge that required navigating labyrinthine corridors patrolled by elite guards. Lyra, meanwhile, focused on planting devices that would amplify the team's message across every corner of the sphere. Her telepathic abilities allowed her to sense danger before it arrived, ensuring they stayed one step ahead. The Council chamber itself was a sprawling, ornate space where decisions that shaped the galaxy were made. As Orion entered, the gathered representatives turned their attention to him, their expressions a mix of confusion and disdain. He had been a respected figure once, but now he was viewed as a rogue, a dangerous anomaly who had betrayed the very institution he once upheld. The councilors demanded to know his purpose, their voices rising in anger, but Orion didn't flinch. He stepped forward, activating the broadcast devices Lyra had placed. The chamber filled with holographic projections of the Crotan's conspiracy, the falsified evidence against Jackson, and the countless atrocities the Council had enabled in the name of stability. The room fell silent as the truth unfolded before them. The images were damning, the data irrefutable. Even the most loyal Council members struggled to find words. Orion's voice cut through the silence, calm but unyielding. "You claim to serve the galaxy, to protect it from chaos. But all you've done is exploit it for your own gain. My son was a casualty of your arrogance, but he will not be the last unless this ends now." The Council erupted into chaos. Some demanded Orion's immediate arrest, others called for an investigation, and a few even voiced their support for his claims. The tension in the room escalated as conflicting factions within the Council began to turn on one another. Orion knew this moment was pivotal. If he failed to seize control of the narrative, the Council would suppress the truth and tighten its grip on power. Kale's voice crackled over the comms, confirming that the sphere's internal defenses were offline. The timing was perfect. As the Council chamber descended into further discord, Orion's team launched the final phase of their plan. Zero unleashed a cascade of data across the sphere's network, exposing decades of hidden corruption and collusion. The information was broadcast across the galaxy, ensuring that no species, no matter how distant, could ignore the truth. The Council's response was swift and brutal. Security forces flooded the chamber, attempting to subdue Orion and his team. Kale and Lyra rejoined him, their paths cleared by Zero's manipulation of the sphere's systems. The confrontation escalated into a full-scale battle, with Orion and his crew using every ounce of their training and ingenuity to hold their ground. Kale's brute strength and combat skills proved invaluable, while Lyra's telepathic insights allowed them to anticipate the enemy's moves. Despite the chaos, Orion's focus never wavered. His goal wasn't just survival, it was victory. He cornered the Council's highest-ranking members, forcing them to confront the reality they had tried to bury. "You thought you could control us," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You thought humanity was weak because we were new. But you forgot what makes us dangerous. We learn, we adapt, and we don't forgive." As the battle reached its climax, Orion made the ultimate decision. He activated a final broadcast, addressing not just the Council but the entire galaxy. His words carried the weight of his loss, his anger, and his hope for a better future. "The Council has failed us all. They have taken lives, silenced voices, and stifled progress. But no more. Today, we take the first step towards something new, a galaxy where power is held accountable and justice is more than a word." The broadcast ended with a powerful visual: the Council chamber in ruins, its leaders subdued, and Orion standing as a symbol of defiance. Across the galaxy, the response was immediate. Protests turned into revolts, alliances shifted, and the foundations of the Council's rule began to crumble. Orion's actions had ignited a movement that could not be stopped. In the aftermath, the Dyson sphere was no longer a symbol of the Council's dominance but of its downfall. Orion and his team disappeared into the shadows, their mission complete. The galaxy they left behind was irrevocably changed, but the fight for true justice was far from over. Orion knew his son's memory would guide him as he continued to navigate this uncertain future. Jackson's death had been a spark, but it was the fire that followed that would shape the galaxy for generations to come.